Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance. And we are fortunate today to have an entrepreneur with us and a good friend of mine. We have known each other. We were just discussing at least 20 years. We can't remember exactly. Maybe John can, but I couldn't. So John Cornelsen here. We've been in each other's houses. We know each other's families. So I'm really glad to have him here. And he's the founder and owner of Evolving Texas, as well as Indigo, where he has a partner. And I know you brought in a CEO of Evolving Texas. We'll talk about all that later. But
Sure.
hey, thanks, John, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Henry. I'm really looking forward to the talk.
And well, we met through an entrepreneurs organization called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. I've had a lot of people on the show from that organization. And that was before you had started your first business, Evolving Texas. You were experienced in civil engineering. It's a civil engineering company. And I know you also graduated from college, the first in your family, at age 38, if I remember right, working your way through school. So you have become really a great success. And but it didn't happen overnight. It was hard work. I'm sure there's some ups and downs like I've had and everybody have had on the show has had. Probably everybody in the world has had. And so when you grew up, did you think you would be an entrepreneur? Was that in your mindset? Or was it?
It's kind of an interesting question. I have some video. I need to find it somewhere. But when I was a little kid, I started out. I had a red wagon that had a little white fence around it. My dad built, and I would go every day. I was probably 6, and I would go every day up and down our block. Grew up on the north side of Fort Worth, and I would collect the newspapers from everybody. And I remember what I loved about doing that is I got to meet everybody and talk to all these people. A lot of them were older people, and collect their newspapers. And I would bring them home and I would stack them in the like under the carport. Kind of, we had this little sort of a garage. It wasn't really a garage, but a shed. And I began to fill that up with newspapers. And finally, it was all the way to the top of the ceiling. It was completely full. We had to put it all in a big pickup truck and haul it down. I remember I got $20 for like a whole summer's work. And it was such a cool thing. So that started me in entrepreneurship. When I was 15, I started a land maintenance or lawn care business. That was a lot of fun. By the time I was 16, I had a couple of guys working with me, making good money, I thought, but I was spending a lot of it on, all the random stuff you buy as a kid. But yeah, I think I always thought I was an entrepreneur. When I got into the civil engineering business, you mentioned that. I started in that really out of kind of growing up around it. My dad was a planner at Carter and Burgess. It's kind of a story I like to talk about is like when I was around 8, I would go up with him on Saturdays and kind of just be in the office. It was Carter and Burgess downtown Fort Worth. And it was such a cool place. And 200 people worked there. And they had music going in the, sound system. And it was just a kind of a fun environment for me. And the planners back then, they would write out words that I had to then put into a Croy machine, which was like this lettering machine. And so I would build these labels and I would print them, and I would get hundreds of words and just start, creating those labels that would then be put on plats for Carter and Burgess. And I remember one time in particular, we worked on a Saturday, and that night we're driving out to see some of my parents' friends, and we're out in the middle of the country, and I see a sign. And it said this property was for sale. And it was a local developer by the name of Hayden Cutler. And I said, Dad, is that the same Hayden Cutler as we were working on the plans today? And he said, yeah, it sure is, son. And I said, Dad, there's a problem. I said, all of the labels have his name spelled wrong. And we had spelled his name Hayden. And they had a big presentation on Monday. So we had to go back in the office on Sunday and fix all the labels and get everything right and get his name right for the meeting. So that was a lot of fun. But that's how I got started into civil engineering. And so I can tell you more about that story. But once I got into engineering, I really started out working for others. I wasn't a licensed engineer. I didn't have, what it took to go create my own company. And so I first spent a lot of time working for others in that field.
And so John taught me something today from another friend of ours, who's an experienced entrepreneur and actually podcaster, about standing up when he does a podcast. I'm thinking about doing that in the future. I'm here sitting, but because you are standing up, we're missing a little bit of your top of your head. If you adjust the camera, it might look slightly better. Uh,
Sure.
and while we're talking about that too, we've got John's a great family man. I think I've maybe met all your kids, 5 kids.
Yeah.
I don't think I've met your grandkids, but behind you are some pictures drawn from your youngest kids, and I
Right.
think that's pretty neat. John's also a very good poker player, and been to a lot of large poker conventions and conferences and tournaments where you've won, and so really smart guy. You must have had a gift for the civil engineering, an aptitude. Uh, Not something easy to just teach yourself without being an engineer, you know.
Well, I'll say this, I was very fortunate. When I was 17, I ran away from home. I went to California from Texas. I got in a pickup truck and I took everything. I had everything I owned in 2 black garbage bags, put them in the back of the truck. And it was an S10 pickup that I had paid off the day before. Um, so I had $4,000 in this pickup truck and 2 bags. And note to your younger self, don't ever run away from home like during the wintertime. So it was the day after Christmas, and I get out to Colorado City, Texas, and it's snowing, and a big gust of wind comes and just blows me off the road, pushes my car into the ditch. They end up telling me it's totaled. I wasn't injured at all, but I remember sitting on the side of that roadside cafe, and I decided, I'm like, I have to decide, am I going forward or am I going to go back? And or I literally just remember like listening to the jukebox and thinking about it because everything else was closed. It's between Christmas and New Year's, and I just decided I had to go forward. Well, when I got to California, my dad got a message to me, and the company that he had worked for in Fort Worth had just opened an office like that week in California. And I said, Dad, California is pretty big. And he said, well, it's in Southern California. Well, Southern California is pretty big. And well, I think it's close. And I looked it up, and it was 10 miles from where I was going to live. And so I went and talked to them, and I said, the vice president of that company at the time, Fred Whistle, still a close friend of mine. I went and interviewed for the job, and I said, I just want to work here. I'll work for anything. And he interviewed me, and he showed me later. He wrote on my application in great big letters, "Do not hire." he was convinced I was just not for the job. But I kept bugging him, and I kept telling him, "Look, I really want to work for you, and I don't care what you pay me." And he went on a vacation, I remember, to Germany, and I started calling his cell phone. And this is in the late '80s, and so it was costing him about $5 a minute every time I would call him. And so I think he decided it was cheaper to give me a job than to keep taking my calls. So he said, "Okay, that's fine. I'll hire you." He started paying me $240 a week salary, and I decided I was going to learn, how to be in the business. I was really going to learn the business, and so my dad used to tell me the old story about working for the railroad or working for pay, and I was working for the company, and so I started working 60 hours a week, Fred. And so what I really owe it to is Fred and a guy named Skip Schmidt, who took me under their wing and taught me. I mean, I would go to lunch with Fred, and he would teach me Manning's equation on a napkin, and we would learn. I'd learn about how to calculate, all these different things, and it just came natural to me. It was fairly easy for me, I think, and very quickly I was able to grow in that company. Within 6 months, he gave me a 50% raise and raised me again 50% and 6 months later, and I think I went from that to $50,000 in like, I think it was 4 or 5 years. I kind of grew up to that level and was doing a lot of cool work for them all over the Western United States. And so it was something that came natural to me, but I absolutely owe like a lifetime of gratitude, to Fred and to, Skip and, even Tom Galbraith later in my life, mentors that I had who made a real difference.
Well, and now that you have the business, it's remarkable to me. I think I have a lot of friends and we hang out on a lot of Friday afternoons, but I think maybe you have a whole lot more. Because I know when I go to, you arrange some get-togethers and happy hours, and over COVID, you arrange Zoom, and I think I've met the mayor, most of the city council, uh, maybe a congressman, all sorts of leaders in the real estate business, all through you, with Fort Worth, and the surrounding areas, connections. And I think you're just a natural at meeting people, and then you've got this company that um, where you're involved in a lot of major projects, working with cities, and so it's a very interesting life from where I sit and where people want to hear about it. Um, what give a brief summary. I mean, I can do it, but of the projects and what Evolving Texas does. 15 years
Sure.
in
So
business.
yeah, so I started that business in 2009, and I've got a partner, Samantha Renz. She's our CEO now, and we also recently hired a president to come in at that company, Ron Ramirez. And so we do a lot of basically land development design. So if you have a piece of property that you're going to go build something on, you come to us. We create the site plan. We figure out the densities you can get. We figure out what kind of return you can expect on your investment. For me personally, a lot of my learning career in that field was doing Walmart work. I started doing Walmart work literally on day one, and I was designing. Back then, super centers were 65,930 square feet. They were these tiny little boxes, and they just grew and grew and grew over time. And it was also interesting because back then people really wanted us to come to town, and today it's the opposite, where people are very much they want to protect their town, and they want every business to really be thoughtful how they come in. And so that's been a fun journey. But in doing that, I think I worked on over 200 super centers and Sam's Clubs across the country. And I just learned a lot about land development because they would pick the really challenging tracks, always on, state highway, and, a lot of cool things to overcome. So you would always have to learn how to, I remember in Casper, Wyoming, I relocated a fiber optic line in 1992 for a Walmart. We got it relocated. It was an extremely expensive project. And then as soon as we got it relocated, Walmart decided to put a Sam's Club right where we had relocated it. So we had to relocate it again. So we do work like that. So it's a lot of fun, whether it's residential subdivisions or commercial buildings, office buildings. We're doing a lot of work like that and involved in infrastructure design and development.
Pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about Indigo, because that is definitely a representative of you being a repeat entrepreneur, because yoga and
Yeah.
civil engineering are usually not thought of as very close brother or sister.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, and then I've got my other company, Juggle, which is my focus right now. And I'll tell you the common thread of all of them, really, for me, is relationships. You mentioned kind of meeting the mayor at one of my events. When I grew up on North Side, I remember, like, as a kid, I didn't collect baseball cards. I collected business cards. Like, I literally would collect. I would meet somebody new, and I would say, "Can I have your business card?" And I just thought it was the coolest thing. It had everything about this person on like one card, And I remember one time, just to show you kind of the power of relationships, I think, and how Fort Worth works, which I love. Um, when I was young, my mom and dad qualified for a low income kind of house refurbishment loan from the city of Fort Worth, and we were the first in the city to get the loan. I think, if I remember right, there were three different tiers of 3%, 6%, and 9% for this special loan, and we got it, and we rehabbed our house. And when we finished the project, that was the first time, and I think the only time in my life I ever saw street sweepers and street washers go up and down our street that morning. So we had street washers come through, and they moved the cars and cleaned everything up. And later that morning, Mayor Bob Bolin came to our house and had TV cameras and all this stuff. And I put it in the newspaper, but, kind of showing the success of the project. Well, that was the first time I'd ever met a mayor, right? And really had never even been exposed to that lifestyle. You mentioned college. TCU might as well have been 200 miles away from where I grew up. It was just not something that was achievable, not something that was in our path. But You know, it's crazy, like to fast forward and think that, you know, during COVID, you know, Mayor Betsy Price, who's a dear friend of mine, you know, she really helped us out, you know, and she was available for me to talk to. You know, you think about it, you know, being mayor of one of the largest cities in the country, to be able to take my messages and just to respond so quickly and to give me guidance and to help me through that, you know, it's something I'll never forget. Um, and so I'm really blessed, you know, to have relationships like that. And I think a lot of that I learned through Entrepreneurs Organization. And I was, I think if you'll remember, you know, we were in EO together in EO Dallas. And then around 2010 or 11, Jeremy Brandt and I started talking about the need for a Fort Worth chapter. And, you know, Jeremy knew I had a lot of relationships in town, so he was talking to me about it. And I was like, you know, sure, we can for sure make that happen. I felt confident because of Fort Worth being such a relationship town, like that we can absolutely pull together people to launch a chapter. So we did that. We launched that chapter in 2011, 2012. I was the initial membership chair, pulling in a lot of members into our chapter. And then I was the second president following Jeremy. That was a real highlight of mine. You know, I remember we were sitting on a rooftop in Vancouver smoking a cigar at an EO event. And Jeremy's like, well, I'd like to ask you, you know, would you be willing to be president of the chapter? And you know, what a kind of a moment in my journey. You know, it was really special to me. And so we launched that chapter, and I was pretty, you know, it was crazy. I had so much going on. I was president. Everything seemed to be going great, and I decided to. I was practicing yoga, right, as a way to for my health and a way to you know, calm my mind and all these things. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I found this cool studio in Fort Worth that I just walked into the studio, and it was this tiny little thing and called Indigo. And immediately I knew I was home. I was like, okay, I'm supposed to be here. And so I just, wow, I was just like finding my mat in that space. I was just so, just, I don't know, at peace. And a couple years later, 2012, I decided I wanted to become a teacher. I wanted to learn how to become a yoga teacher, primarily because I was, you know, I was leading an EO, doing a lot of public speaking. I knew that it would help me, you know, with my observational skills. It would help me, you know, like with leading a group, like moving a class through a yoga class is just really a fun experience. And to observe and watch people and to cue them to get the most out of the class is just such a fun training. So I started doing that and loved every minute of it. And the owner of the studio, Brooke Hamblett, I began mentoring her on different challenges she was having because she knew I was in entrepreneurship. Talked to her about EO, and at one point we got her into EO, and I was mentoring her on that. And finally, we just talked one day, and we said we should be partners because she really loved the yoga side of the business, and I love the business side of the business. And so I became her partner, and then later ended up owning all of the studio. And so then now today I took on Sandra McLaughlin as a partner with us now, and love her. And really we are shifting Indigo into being such a community effort for how we can give back to our community and create a space that is really a refuge for people who are, you know, navigating 2024. You know, this is times are crazy right now. A lot of times, I mean, whether they're good or bad, but there's a lot going on that we've never seen before. And so I think giving people that home that I found, you know, is such a cool thing. That's why I do that. I mean, I love creating that same feeling, you know, for people. I think there were 31 people who walked in our studio for the first time this month. And that makes my heart feel good. So.
Well, Juggle, I know you mentioned that. That's
Yeah.
something that's close to your heart because that ties into some of your philosophies and your passion about bringing people together. And you mentioned when you talk about it, you've been working on that for some time as well. That's been in business for a number of years, and that's I know it's a big job to get us started with software and everything off the ground. But you're on your way with that one as well.
Yeah, that's been a real, I mean, again, I continue to kind of just push myself. I don't know if serial entrepreneur is the word or serial something else, but I continue to push myself to my limits. And I think in some ways that's good because I feel like if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, you know? You kind of got to be like pushing yourself. And so I decided to try to learn software, which is an interesting thing. But I had some investors early on. I'm super thankful for who backed us. We put in some capital. Really went through several. I could write 3 books on how not to do it, probably, and I could write a chapter on how to do it. But we made a lot of mistakes, and we're still learning. But really have a great team right now developing our software. You can read about it at juggleapps.com, juggle or juggletribe.com will get you there as well. But really the premise of that is, again, what I'm seeing is like relationships and loneliness. I began to look at this back in 2013. I remember there was a New Yorker article that talked about the potential deleterious effects of social media. Like it was just maybe out there. And I was just like, okay, I could really see like where this is going is not healthy. People keeping up with friends and relationships on Facebook or on social, as opposed to kind of getting together in a hot tub on a Friday afternoon and hanging out like face to face and talking, right, and really connecting. And so I believe that loneliness today is an epidemic that no one's talking about, or some people are talking about it, but not loudly enough. And I'm trying to add to that chorus because it's one of the leading causes of death after you get to be 50 years old. Loneliness and social isolation, it absolutely kills you. It shortens your lifespan. And so I think it's super important to get people to be intentional about their connections. And I'm very much about intentionality in everything that I do. Really understand why I'm doing something, and if I'm not getting that result, then stop doing it. So I just think what I'm trying to do is take my passion for getting people to connect and to educate and empower people at scale, right? To connect. I can talk to you about it and the people on this podcast. Hopefully I'll challenge you right now, whoever's listening to this, to just stop for a second, pause, and open your phone and text somebody that you haven't talked to in 30 days and tell them that they matter to you. Tell them that you care, because you never know, like people need to hear that, right? And so I sometimes I talk on stage and I'll have people in the middle of the talk and just stop and text people, and I love that because all of a sudden they get to feel this, right, what I'm talking about, and this sense of actually, I know we're all like connected to our devices too much, but you can actually take the device for a second and create a real genuine connection and set up something to go have coffee, go play golf, whatever it is that you love to do, play poker. You mentioned me having events. One of the reasons I love events is I can keep up with 50 or 100 people at once, face to face. I can shake their hand, I can give them a hug, and it's not just like an email blast, or it's not a newsletter. So,
and you're still pushing on other areas as well, because you're leading a massive regional event for the EO organization. You're one of the leaders in that in Fort Worth, and you've been a leader in EO beyond the chapter level ever since you were president of the chapter. So you keep pushing the boundaries and taking on new things. Along those lines, I know you shared some of it with Juggle, and you know a lot of mine, and I know a lot of yours, but people like to hear an obstacle that maybe you've overcome, or some hard time that you went through in one of the businesses, or personally or professionally, and kind of how it worked out. Or how
yeah,
it didn't work out and you went on to something else. Sorry.
Something I took from my current vendor on my software project, Juggle. They said something to me last year, which I thought was so cool. They were like, all problems are co-created. And I was like, that is so true. And it's so, sometimes it's so easy to like get to where I've been in situations where, the conflict comes up, and you have to part ways with somebody, right? With a partner or whatever it is. And I've seen that happen. And so often it's so easy to think, man, I can't believe, that person did whatever it was, and the reality is, like, I now look back and I realize I 100% created the environment that allowed things to happen. I've created, challenges. Like I just went through some learning last week on something that, really, if I would have really been where I am today 3 years ago, I would have had a different result 3 years ago, right? And so I think you got to give yourself some grace. You got to definitely give the other person some grace. Something I'm reading right now is kind of making me see it more along the lines of, we're all one, we are all each other, really, because we're all human. We're all going through this kind of journey, this path, and we're trying to all figure it out. And so anytime I try to separate myself from their perspective, I'm not necessarily, I'm losing, I think. So I think that's probably what I could say. My biggest obstacle has been myself, in learning that, right? How can I show up, better, for people around me, even in conflict, right? And to realize that, we're all in this together and there's a great solution to be found.
Oh yeah, that's inspiring. And I think whether it's Christian or um, philosophy, so many, or even yoga, taking responsibility for your things that happen in your life, and also giving yourself grace because we're human. What great words of wisdom.
Yeah.
That's a nice thing to wrap up on. Really, really fantastic. Thank you for coming on. I know people are gonna enjoy hearing about this, and uh, hey, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Henry. It's awesome. A real pleasure. I look forward to our next time together.
You bet.